And welcome to our last Adult Sunday School of September of 2024. So we are going through the Bible timeline, and we are in Exodus chapter 14, getting ready for chapter 15. So that being said here, let's go to that and that. So we're getting outside the Bible timelines, courtesy of Egyptologist David Roll and his new chronology. And we are getting the Exodus route here, courtesy of Dr. Glenn Fritz and his writings here. And both have been very kind in their correspondence with me and their provisions and support. So we are at the year in Exodus 1446 BC. Middle Bronze Age. Section A going into B thereabouts. So let's see. So we're about to split the sea, and this is what it would have looked like. Looking at the Gulf of Aqaba, there's the satellite view from above. That's how big a swath we're talking. About a 5-mile width that they've been traveling across here. And as we've mentioned, it's 9.6 miles across, going down 10.5%, coming up 13%, or 6 degrees down, 7.4 going up. Interstate highways go down about that slope, and wheelchair ramps go up about that slope. So very manageable and doable. So here, Exodus 14, let me turn there myself. So Middle Bronze Age 2A, as I mentioned, going into B. At this point in time, this snapshot moment, China is being led by Emperor Y Ren of the Shang dynasty, their second dynasty after the Xia dynasty. Egypt, the pharaoh of all of this stuff, is Dudamos II of Egypt's 13th dynasty. This is in their second intermediate period, a lower point for Egypt after the Middle Kingdom with Joseph's pharaoh Amenemhat III, and later on will be the New Kingdom with King Tut and Ramses the Great and all that. That's centuries away from right now. So right now, 13th dynasty, Dudamos II in this intermediate period, second intermediate period. Over in the Bible lands, Babylon is being ruled by Amidatana as king, who's the great-grandson of Hammurabi, famous for the law code. The Lord's people here exiting out of Egypt. In the line of Judah, we have Aminadab, I put about 98. His son Nahshon, I put about 39. Nahshon's the 28th generation of Adam. He's Boaz's grandpa. He's the leader of the tribe of Judah heading out in this Exodus. So let's refresh Exodus 14. God bless you. Exodus 14. That's the great thing about sneezing in a church. You're going to get a lot of blessings. Well, plus no one here wants to get sick too. So it's anyway. I know. We were joking earlier about the origin of the God bless you, and it's really self-serving. I don't want to catch what you got, so God bless you. So, yes. Okay, Exodus 14, verse 21. Then Moses reached out with his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back, accompanied by a strong east wind all night, turned the sea into dry land. The waters were divided. So the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right and their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit. All Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them to the midst of the sea. But at the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion, caused their chariot wheels to swerve, made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians each said, "Let me flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Verse 26. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Reach out with your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses reached out with his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right and on their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. And we've looked at some Psalms that refer to this. We'll do some more of that. Reference 1 Corinthians 10, where Paul refers to this as their baptism after their Passover blood applied experience. Now their Passover under the cloud and with the water at their sides. Again, this is about a 5-mile spread here with the water. So one of the reasons why the Egyptians were able to just go right in was they didn't even see during the night here that the water was off to their sides here. They didn't even realize they were on the seabed now. And so a pretty powerful movement of the Lord. There is absolutely zero natural explanation for this parting of the Exodus Sea here at what we call now the Gulf of Aqaba. So Exodus 14:21 again, then Moses reached out with his hand over the sea. The Lord swept the sea back, accompanied by a strong east wind all night, turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Now, many of your translations may not say accompanied. We're going to talk about that here. The Hebrew grammar here in Exodus 14:21, and this is per Dr. Glenn Fritz here, shows that the wind was an accompanying phenomenon. It wasn't the cause. It wasn't a causative factor. We'll talk more about this as we go. Now, if we think about it, the presence of the wind would certainly be expected due to the rapid inrush of air over here into the void created by the displacement of these great volumes of water. So yeah, anytime there's a vacuum, it gets filled with something. Now, as far as the other events around this, he shares, it's important to note other biblical references to the crossing do not mention or stress wind. In fact, we're going to hold our place here. Let's go to Psalm 114. Psalm 114. One great thing about the Bible is it keeps referring back to itself, even though it's different authors writing over different times and in different periods and different places. All one whole continuing truth here. Psalm 114, pick up in verse 3. The sea looked and fled. The Jordan turned back, as we'll see happen in the future. The mountains skip like rams, the hills like lambs. What ails you see that you flee? Jordan, in that example, that you turn back. Mountains that you skip like rams, hills like rams. So what's happening here when we talk about the hills and the mountains moving and skipping, California residents, what's that like for us? Earthquake. Yeah, so this is big movement that's happening here. Seismic activity could have certainly have been induced by the unloading of millions of tons of water from the seafloor. The Gulf of Aqaba here is cradled within a transform fault that hosts several fault blocks within a seismically active rift zone over here. So seismic earthquake activity here, yeah. A lot of that is the mountains are lifted up because of all that stuff that we've happened. The tectonic plates we talked about the other week. Brother Clay.
With all this going back and looking at the evidence, and
yeah,
was there any indication or because that amount of area of water pushed to the side would raise the level? You would think it would raise the levels on either side. Well, maybe not the inlet side, but that maybe there was a water line that was left from the rising of the.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
Great question. So Brother Clay asks, you know how like we see like over here at Three Rivers, the water there, sometimes we see when the water is lower high, we see watermarks where the water has been. So the Brother Clay is asking an excellent question. With the water being pushed back and therefore water that was in the center now being placed on top of the other waters, do we see on the shore markings of water levels of where this had been higher than it is now based on this event? No, we don't. Yeah, and with that, keep in mind too, as the Lord is supernaturally moving these waters, he's supernaturally lifting them up as a wall above them, off to the sides here. And so I believe that the water, fun word for us today is meniscus. Now, some of you with knee troubles might be familiar with that word, but what the definition of meniscus is the water at the top, it forms like a little dip and is higher. Sometimes, well, if you keep adding water to something, you'll see water go above the container and not spill over automatically. That top water line is called a meniscus, and there's some cool physics and science into how that all plays out. But here, this is God, the author of the laws of physics, miraculously intervening and overriding and causing this water to be held in place, not within the container of the shoreline, and this miracle crossing to happen. Sister Peggy, then Sister Minnie. Oh, good. Sister Minnie.
Maybe the rest of you don't remember World War II. But I was a kid, my dad was in the army, and he said this, they told him, when you cross a bridge, you know, when you're river, in a big company, you don't march because it will break the bridge. So many footsteps fall. So they have to walk, you know, just regular walking instead of marching, because that many people here, you know, traveling the same cause of the big problem.
Yeah.
The earth movement.
Ah.
The bridge movement. So I thought that was important here.
Yeah.
Because you said, you know, that mountains were moving.
Yeah.
5,000 different Israelites plus their herds. Yeah, and then the army's coming behind them. That was a lot.
Yeah. So with this, so thank you so much for that example and a reference, Sister Minnie, with the bridges in World War II and crossing them carefully, recognizing the impact on the area around them. Well, all this is happening with earthquakes, and we'll get into more meteorological stuff as well accompanying this, and this massive spread of millions of tons of water and the seismic activity. What God is doing is in all this chaos, he's creating a peaceful path on solid ground. Dry ground. So here we go again, 5 miles across here, 2.5 million total people going across this 9.6 miles here. Basically, it's going to take them at about 2 miles an hour here going down and then going back up. It's going to take them 5 hours to get from one side to the other in their ranks as they're going. Sister Peggy. Yeah.
Well, when the earthquake under the sea happens, it causes a tsunami.
Yep.
I'm thinking that is even more awesome. Like,
yes,
to think that they could have been seeing like these crazy high water heights, and then God, of course, it's miraculous anyway.
right.
But I mean, it could have been happening.
Yeah.
That they're just looking at it like it's not a still water, like
Exactly.
like,
That's the beauty of it.
and not only am I going to do that, but you're going to cross on dry ground. So just go.
Yeah, tie this into Noah's worldwide flood. This is their ark of safe passage in the midst of the storm around them. And just like Noah's flood, what was the cause of that? We see in the scriptures talk about this, how the depths of the sea were split, underground earthquakes, and the water shooting up into the air, as well as coming down for the 40 days and 40 nights and all that stuff. So yeah, all this upheaval, and Sister Peggy beautifully pointed out, water, earthquake, tsunami. What's a tsunami? Rising water. What do we have on the sides of the Israelites? Rising water. So here it is, all set up for them, again, miraculously under God's control for their safe passage. Brother Brennan.
Just like a bunch of dead fish on the ground.
We're going to talk about that. I'm so glad you asked.
How the God moved and the miracles that were performed during that time when Israel was down there, the Hebrews were down for 400 years, and that they prayed all this time for God, and
yes,
and there it is, he did miracles and showed them that.
Yeah, let's remember the time frame leading up to this. Thank you so much for that, Brother Peter. So 430 years before the Exodus, Abraham leaves Haran in the northern Middle East and comes down into the promised land of Canaan and on into Egypt during the famine that very year, 430 years before the Exodus. 215 years later, Jacob is brought by Joseph into Egypt, and the whole family comes down and is now residing in Egypt 215 years before the Exodus. And when Jacob tells Pharaoh he's 130 years old at this point, so we can easily do the math from the ages of the patriarchs to see that just coincidentally happens to be the midpoint of the 430. And then a few years before Moses is born, we have the change out of many pharaohs, and a pharaoh without regard for Joseph, and who is imposing the slavery and imposing the threats on their lives, and the killing of the babies and all the males and all that stuff. And so the slavery really kicks in a few years before Moses is born, and Aaron is born who's 3 years before Moses. Aaron's 83 right now. Moses is 80. So they've been enslaved for just over 100 years. And then so they've only been enslaved for 100 years. And then the death decrees for the babies were happening just right before Moses was born. So Aaron escaped that, but Moses was under it, which is why he was delivered to Pharaoh's daughter. And so that brings us to where we are now with 83-year-old Aaron, 80-year-old Moses, 2.5 million Israelites who had come down as a family. Now we're witnessing the birth of a nation. We're witnessing from salvation and baptism. We got Passover, and now the crossing of the waters. And now the Lord is birthing a nation here. They're going to enter into a covenant with him on Mount Sinai and go to the promised land of Canaan to be living it out and carrying it out. So yeah, appreciate the perspective, Brother Peter, very much on what's happening here in the big picture, where they came from and where they're going. Let's go to Psalm 77. Talking more about this meteorological activity. In regards to Brother Brennan's question on a bunch of dead fish flopping off the shores, quite possible. We don't have a record of that specifically, but it would make sense. But we do have scriptures that involve marine life during all of this. And we'll get to that. Psalm 77, pick up in verse 16. Psalm 77:16. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you. They were in anguish. The ocean depths also trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sounded out. Your arrows flashed here and there. The sound of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was in the sea, and your paths in the mighty waters, and your footprints were not known. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So here in that passage from Psalm 77, we see not only the seismic activity, but also the other weather phenomena in there as well. Josephus, famous Jewish historian from a few years after Jesus, he talks about this as well. Josephus says, as soon as the whole Egyptian army was within it, so it had to be large enough to encapsulate them as well, the sea flowed to its own place, came down with a torrent raised by storms of wind, encompassed the Egyptians. Showers of rain came down from the sky, dreadful thunders and lightning, flashes of fire. Thunderbolts also were darted upon them. That's from Josephus's Book of Antiquities, 2 and on in there. And now to the sea life, Psalm 74. Who'd have known all this Exodus info would be in Psalms? Psalm 74. Let's see. Verse 12 into 13. Let's see here. Yeah. And on 14. Yeah, please.
That it was like probably about 5 hours.
Hmm. For each rank. For each rank, because they couldn't all go in a straight line. So they were marching. So there were so many deep and so many across. And so for each row of Israelites, because they are, stacked back, for each row of Israelites is about a 5-hour trip from one shore to the other. Yeah. So this is not like a Black Friday where everyone's stampeding. This is or overnight. Yeah, exactly. So if the first row starts off, and then 5 hours later, they make it to the other side. Well, it takes all the rest of the night for the last row. Think about, again, the example of being backed up at a stoplight. The light turns green. Everyone doesn't just go because you have to wait for the ones ahead of you to start, and then you go. So to here. So there's the backlog, if you will. So the last ones make it to the other side at daybreak, and that's when things shift for the Egyptians as they enter in after them. So yeah, good stuff, good clarification. Psalm 74, verse 12. Yet God is my king from long ago, who performs acts of salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, gave him food as the creatures of the wilderness, broke open springs and torrents, dried up ever-flowing streams. So here, even sea life is impacted. The great, major, huge sea life. The largest mammals in the world are not on land. They're the blue whales and others that are in the sea. And so, yeah, huge sea life is impacted by this massive upheaval here. So Brother Brennan's absolutely right to be thinking of that and aware of that factor as well. And again, very possibly, when all said and done, are there fish flopped on the shores? Seems very likely to me. Imagine the floodwaters residing and falling back into place and what's left after all that. So yeah, so this is very, very big deal. Huge. Sharknado, yes. Number 6 now, I think they're on. Yeah. And so Dr. Fritz kind of brings us all together and shares with us. Taken as a whole, the historical references to this event imply it was immense and complex, exhibiting both meteorological and geological phenomena. So the famous questions gets asked. Okay, well, if the Egyptian army drowned here, where's the evidence? In fact, Egyptologist David Roll, whom I respect very much, but respectfully disagree on this point as far as where this sea crossing took place, he says, show me the remains of the army down there, and then I'll believe that the Gulf of Aqaba was the place. So let's talk about this, Sister Peggy. Yeah, well, and that's what we're going to talk about. Yeah, and there's some question about what's been found and the validity of it, the accuracy of it, what it could be, what it could not be. So I'll say right now, what has been found, we cannot declare 100% that is the Roman army from the Exodus of 1446 BC. Is it possible? Yes, but takes further research. Well, there's a problem here, and that's what he's going to talk about. So Dr. Fritz continuing here. Recovery of underwater specimens from the Gulf of Aqaba is currently prohibited by Egyptian law. Oh, it gets better. Exploration. So here's the Egyptian side with the Sinai Peninsula. Here's Saudi Arabia over here. Mecca is a little further down there. There's Midian. So exploration from the Saudi Arabian side would not be permitted in the current political climate. And he wrote this just a couple years ago. The Mideast always involves significant geopolitical considerations. Marine research at the Nuweiba transect on this side would technically come under the purview of both Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Looking at this crossing here, this transect in between the two. Both states could claim 12-mile territorial waters in a bay that's often less than 12 miles wide. So no part of the Gulf falls into the category of the high seas or international waters. Instead, this right here is a multi-jurisdictional body of water for which there are no legal norms, except for customary laws pertaining to freedom of innocent passage. So in other words, 12 months, basically sovereignty of a country that has water, has a shoreline, sovereignty is recognized internationally as being 12 miles out, that's still yours. After that, it's international waters and it's not yours. Well, this is only 9.6 miles across here. So it doesn't leave Egypt's jurisdiction before it hits Saudi Arabia's jurisdiction. And so there's overlap there. So they got multiple jurisdictions to deal with anytime you're going to try to do something here, is the point. Sister Diana. Sea boundary. Beautiful. I'm so glad you said that. Yes, because going back to the Hebrew, the word in the Bible is not Red Sea. It is Yam Suf, which means sea of boundary or sea of ending. Yeah. So they've got, not only do they have the literal boundary, this is the boundary of the promised land here at the tip here, but also, unfortunately, they're facing legal boundaries and binds with their efforts to try to do this. So brilliant that you brought that up. I'm so glad. So let's see. So considering, as Dr. Fritz continues, considering the territorial problems, the controversial religious overtones of the Exodus topic, obtaining permission for underwater exploration may be, he says, a more daunting challenge than the depths themselves to be explored. Might be easier exploring the depths than getting permission to do so. And lots of folks in this area, lots of governments in this area, hey, I'm going out to prove the Exodus was right here. Well, we don't want this to become a Jewish or Christian tourist attraction. And so, especially, a lot of the Muslim influence over here. So yeah, we're kind of going to frown on that or not allow that. And we'll talk more as we get towards Mount Sinai, all the restrictions, all the governments and guns and taking into custody of folks trying to explore this area that has happened over the years. So there's an issue. So again, talking about the Egyptian army following, limited lighting. Remember, this is overnight. Wide path in the sea would have given the Egyptians little indication they'd even entered the seabed. Exodus 14:24. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. So that suggests the Egyptian troubles began just prior to sunrise. But the Hebrews had completed their passage by daybreak. So they are good and safe on the other side. So again, mentioning the time span here in the travel, the width of the Gulf of Nueva here, at the width of this gulf at Nueva going across is about 10 miles, 9.6. If the Hebrews averaged 2 miles per hour going down and up during this passage through the sea, each rank of the multitude would have taken about 5 hours to complete the crossing. And then, overnight for the whole group. So again, zooming out, it probably, using this route we've looked at, courtesy of Dr. Fritz, may have taken the Hebrews 18 days to reach the sea, another day or two spent for their encampment and passage through the sea. So we're now on day 20 with them getting to the other side since they left. So day 20 would be the Hebrew second month now, the fourth of the second month, for us about Tuesday, May 12th, 1446 BC. So in the springtime here, let's see what else we got to look at here. So we'll talk about this now and a little more as we go, the Egyptian remains. The idea of the immediate sighting of dead Egyptians, well, that's a kind of contrasted with other verses. Let's go into Exodus 15. Exodus 15, the Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has thrown into the sea. The choicest of his officers are drowned in the boundary sea. The waters cover them. They went down in the depths like a stone. And on from there. So on the one hand, we're talking about in chapter 14, verse 30, they saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore, but here we're being told that they sank. So which one is it? The answer is yes. And we're going to talk about that and get into some scientific things that happen with corpses. So also, if you skip down to Exodus 15, verse 10, you blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. So let's talk about these ones who sink here. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 11 refers back to this. The Lord threw their persecutors into the deeps as a stone into the mighty waters. So it makes sense. Think about it. Many of the Egyptians likely had metallic armaments strapped to their bodies. Their horses would have been saddled or harnessed and connected to chariots. So the weight of these items, the driving force of the closing waters, would have caused the majority of the host to sink like a stone, just as described. That all makes sense. We can see that. Do a little Mythbusters here, recreation. So we'll come back to that more because we're going to see that later on the journey, the Israelites returned to the Red Sea, the boundary sea. Not mentioned in Exodus, but it's mentioned in Numbers. So we'll talk about that and what happens there. Back to Egyptologist David Roll. The discovery of horse remains in the archaeological context are datable to, guess when? The 13th dynasty, when we're saying this happened. If horses were introduced into Egypt prior to the Hyksos occupation, we'll talk about Hyksos there much later. Well, it's starting to come in, but we'll get there. So this is before the horses are before the Hyksos. So what were they used for then at this time? To pull chariots, because horseback riding was not introduced until much later. So if you got horses right at this point in time in history in Egypt, you're using them for your chariots. Okay. One further important clue David Roll mentions has to do with gloves. Now, chariot gloves were a status symbol. Remember when cars first came out? I say remember, not everyone had one. Ford is Model T, you can have whatever color you want as long as it's black, just because mass producing it, so it could be affordable for everyone. Chariots weren't mass produced and affordable for everyone. So it is a sign of status to have one or have the accessories, because you got to accessorize, right? And so chariots with the rope, so you got chariot gloves. So if you're someone with chariot gloves, ooh, you're someone special. Chariot gloves, status symbol, to be displayed as a mark of rank, signaling out the wearer as a member of His Majesty's elite troops. Showed this the other week. These are fragments of a stela, which is basically a big stone thing that gets smoothed out and then written on or carved over. Don't know if you can quite make it out here. Here's a lady with some stuff under her seat in this box here. Here's her fella with stuff under his seat here, and a zoom in of what's under his seat. And we have right here gloves. This is the king's son and army commander of Edfu. His name is Khonsu-Amswet. That's this individual we know right here. He's seated with his wife on a chair, and he's got a pair of gloves depicted under his seat. This guy, Khonsu-Amswet, was the commander of a force of Pharaoh's chariots. Under her, we've got a mirror and jewelry box beneath the wife's chair, show her she's the lady of the household. The king, whose son was the commander of the chariot forces of Egypt, was Dudamos II. This is one of his sons. The very Pharaoh who pursued the Israelites to the boundary sea, where the pride of Egypt's army was decimated, this is his son with the chariot gloves right here. So Pharaoh, seeing his enemies making their dash for freedom, gives the order to pursue. Now remember, Dudamos' firstborn son, the heir to the throne, Harseeker, he was killed in his late 20s in the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. Pharaoh lost his firstborn son in his late 20s, Harseeker. So now his second and now oldest son, Khonsu-Amswet, the army commander of the king's chariotry, now they're leading the attack, revenge for their lost son and brother, and going out. So again, army commander of the king's chariotry. So as David Roll imagines, the Egyptian forces sped towards the last few stragglers as they're on the other side, but then they start to have troubles. Now he writes that he imagines them sinking in mud, but we know, as we talked last week, there's no mud here. It's all dry. So it wasn't that they got stuck in the mud, it's that God was supernaturally acting against them. And the Egyptians recognized this and said, we need to retreat. They're gods, tripping us up. And so then the waters come crashing in them. And Moses, looking from the other side, sees Pharaoh and his whole army taken out by the sea here. So kind of wrapping this part all up. So the Yam Suf in Hebrew, all the words to describe it, as Dr. Fritz says, they present a unified picture here, a deep body of water capable of raging conditions. Now, these characteristics are not easily relegated to the shallow landlocked marshes that have been envisioned as the Reed Sea theories. Lots of folks try to say that the Exodus Sea crossing was just a shallow place closer to Egypt, a Reed Sea. Suf does not mean reed. That's a separate word in Hebrew. And so the supernatural is too much, so they try to rationalize and make it a smaller scale thing, and it just doesn't fit the Bible. According to everything said in the Bible, it can't be anything but what we see here. Of all the different options and places and even times, the Gulf of Aqaba here at this Nuiba beach crossing satisfies every single Bible criteria and doesn't contradict any of them. All of the other theories have holes in them based on what the Bible actually says, and it doesn't work. They don't work, but this one does. And the treacherous conditions here are confirmed by a report from the Naval Intelligence Division back in 1946. So that sea crossing was, again, no joke. Going back to here. So this is raging waters here. Remember in the New Testament Gospels, the Sea of Galilee had raging conditions. Jesus calms the storm in that lake. So large bodies of water are capable of these things. Let's talk about the wind here a bit. The wind blew strongly all night long. The Hebrews crossed the sea the same night, and they would have encountered those winds. So a single wind direction would not exert adequate force in the multiple vectors needed to sustain a lengthy walled path. Kind of like we talked about the wind direction with the locusts blowing, and how that gets misinterpreted. So the wind to blow the water all the way off to the side here and all the way off to the side there would have to be coming from multiple directions. And if it were wind holding it, that would be blowing these Israelites all over the place. And so that's not what happened. This wasn't caused by the wind. That's not what the Hebrew is saying. And so where do we get that misunderstanding? In Hebrew, the preposition by, where Exodus 14:21 says, the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind. The Hebrew preposition by means near, like you're by something, but it's never a cause. It's caused by this. So the sea went back by the wind. In the English sense of by, we're thinking it's due to, it was caused by the wind, but that's not the Hebrew. Hebrew doesn't say that. So the wind accompanied the movement of the sea, but the wind was not the cause, the instrument of the moving of the sea. So makes sense? And last thought here on the sea crossing from David Roll, he mentions that Pharaoh Dudimos most likely drowned in the Yam Suf along with his son, Khonsu and Waset, commander of the Egyptian chariot tree, and the rest of the northern army. So that is the Exodus sea crossing from the scriptures and from the science, historical, and geological, and all the different aspects all coming together to tell this amazing story of God's work. So reactions, thoughts, comments, questions. Yeah, brother Alan, what you got?
These people are not familiar with water and wind. They didn't understand that how much wind would it take to separate the sea, but they never experienced so much wind that the waters would be raging.
Exactly. Exactly. You're so right. So Alan provides some wonderful human common sense and observation of nature to point this out that, yeah, for enough wind to cause that effect on water, it would be affecting the people as well. So wind clearly was not the cause here. The people were safe. The seas were drastically moved. So yeah, big deal. So clearly supernatural. Now, does God miraculously use his own natural creation? Absolutely. Gary Habermas was referenced in God's Not Dead 2. I've got his book on miracles, great stuff. Basically, there are two classifications of miracles: constellation miracles and violation miracles. Constellation miracles is the miraculous timing of all sorts of different factors all brought together at the precise moment needed for something to happen. And it's one of those things where how many times can you say it's a coincidence? And God is the master orchestrator of these things. And so God can miraculously coordinate. And again, for nature to fall into place like this, it has to be preconceived and planned thousands of years ago at creation when things are set in motion so that all these things would happen exactly when they're going to happen. And so that is miraculous, intelligent design planning. The other type of miracle, referred to as a violation miracle, we may be more comfortable saying overriding miracle, where God, the author of the laws of nature and physics, overrides them. He is basically, on the one hand, violating what was in place, but he has authority to override, so he's not outside his authority. Sister Minnie.
Big scratch in my ear, but I was thinking.
Oh.
For instance.
I saw this.
White,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't turn. You can't turn water to wine, even if you have grape juice.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for it to ferment. And yet Jesus did it, so that gives the authority of God.
Yes, authority over nature. Yeah, might turn to vinegar after several years, but yeah, not water. Yes, great point, Brother Peter.
So, through our lifetime, we've seen things that are kind of beyond the ordinary stuff. The other day, they had something on the news, and the guy was filming the palm leaves that was exploding. And it's on channel 30.
Okay.
And then it's been on the YouTube it was just floating, and he was filming it, and he walked all the way around it, and it was just floating in the air. That's the wind, you know, just.
Oh, it was hovering, yeah.
It just stood there, and he's like.
Wow.
He went around it, and he's like, wow, look at this, you know, just. I thought about how the water's, you know. Do there have to be wind right there going on the people, or God has a way of doing things using, gravity and everything, but he does, only he knows.
Absolutely. So great examples where fascinating things happen in the natural world already. And God can certainly use these. We see that God supernaturally took his creation and did the things with it, with the movement of the waters. And we understand that there's naturally that in-draft of wind filling that vacuum and void there. But it wasn't so much that it affected the people, and the wind wasn't God didn't use wind to move the waters. But God supernaturally moved the waters, separated them 5 miles apart, kept them stacked up as a wall on either side. So yeah, so God's work in his creation is incredibly fascinating. And this shook the world. The whole world is going to know about it. And we're going to see about that as we go into Exodus 15 and on from there. And we'll get to that. But also, I want to reference the article we read the other Wednesday from Brother Howard about the future Exodus of Egypt. He referenced Old Testament scriptures that show, Jeremiah and others, that as great as the Exodus is, and the Jewish people today rightfully look back to it, and rightfully so do we. Our Lord's Supper is a continuation of the Passover and all of this deliverance and becoming of a people together. So Jeremiah talks about it's no longer going to be the Lord who delivered you out of Egypt, the Lord who delivered you out of Egypt, but there is a future Exodus for the Lord's people that's coming with the end times, and a future preservation in the wilderness and a deliverance where they're going to be recognizing, okay, this Antichrist is a false Messiah. Jesus Christ, after all, is the true deliverer, and they're going to put their faith in him. And so the great deliverance they're going to have after that is going to be so much greater in magnitude that they're going to forget the Exodus, as huge as this all was. So Jesus Christ miraculously moving and delivering, even in the heat of the Antichrist oppression, is going to be powerful. Yeah, Alan.
I didn't hear you mention anything about, is the ground dry?
Yeah, great question. Exodus 14, verse 22. So the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land.
I mean, it's nothing else.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Right. There's no, I mean, even if water naturally removes, there's going to be residual water. There's going to be mud with the water mixing with the sand. Bottom of the ocean. Yes, yes. Again, verse 29, but the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on the right, on the left. So powerful, beautiful stuff. This can only be an act of God. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, let me hit the buzzer. Thank you for that. Of course, if I were really smart, I would have just delegated that and stuck that thing on your pew. So because I keep forgetting. Thank you. So while they're coming, check this out. So here's a shipwreck on the other shore. The Georgios S. This ship crashed in 1978. Oops. So here's what the other side looks like. Because keep in mind, 2.5 million people, there had to be enough room for them to camp on the one side and for them to arrive on the other here. Yay, let's all pose. There's stuff there now. And the underwater life. Yeah, camping out. Yeah. Yeah, so right up there. I guess it's a tourist attraction now. I don't know if they charge money or anything, but yeah. Some things, you've heard the song, It's Cheaper to Keep Her. Sometimes it's too much trouble than it's worth, or as my wife would say, too much sugar for a nickel. So we will pick up next week with the Song of Moses and the Song of Miriam, and getting ready for the journey into the wilderness of Shur on the way to Mount Sinai. So we'll go ahead and stop our share here, and we will stop our recording and get ready to go before the Lord in song together.